What's up? Today we're gonna take a look at a really mind-blowing game between Garry Kasparov playing white against Computer playing black. The game was played back in 1992, the game which was rich of different interesting chess events. There was also a match between Fischer and Spassky, their second match, with the biggest prize fund in chess, $4 million. And this particular match between Kasparov and Computer was the first encounter between a human and a fairly strong computer, even though of course it wasn't as strong as the modern day computers, but nevertheless it was already pretty strong. In this match, actually, right now we can see the King's Indian attack playing, Kasparov is playing it as white. He's going knight to d2, and after that it's going pawn to e4. As we can see, he's trying to drag the opponent out of its opening book so that Computer is forced to think independently, and that is why probably he's using a bit unusual order of moves of white. As you may notice, it's actually the King's Indian defense reversed, played as white. And also another thing which Kasparov is trying to do here is playing a close type of positions, and that is why in this particular position, instead of playing a natural development move knight to f3, he actually plays pawn to f3, which is slightly inferior, even though still okay. But basically the Kasparov's idea is to keep this pawn shield and to avoid potential tactical battle, where we all know that computers are extremely strong. Here Computer, which was Fritz 2, played bishop to e6, and at this point Kasparov played pawn to c3. I think it was a bit inaccurate, because with this pawn setup, it's usually really good for white to move the knight actually to h3, and from here it usually then goes to f2, and it closes the gaps between the whites, weak pawns. And in this case, white's position slightly passive and yet pretty strong and pretty hard for black to crack. And while playing pawn to c3, Kasparov is trying to not let black somehow take advantage of the d4 square. But in this case, if black would play here queen d7, taking control over this square on h3, I believe Kasparov would actually be in trouble, because now all these kind of weak squares he's got here could be a big problem for him later on. Anyway, this did not happen in the actual game, so in this point Fritz played bishop to e7. By the way, I gotta note, also mention that this was the first match, I believe, where a world champion lost some games against a computer. But of course, on a positive side, Kasparov still won the match, which is also cool. Okay. White played knight h3. Here he reverts back to this correct setup, moving his knight to f2, and simultaneously the knight somewhat little bit threatens to go to g5, disturbing the bishop. And as we can see, Computer was a little bit disturbed by the threat, and he played pawn to d4. It was probably not the best move for black here, because usually when you have flexibility which keeps your opponent under pressure, it is usually to keep it. Such as in this case, if I take a move back here, you can see that at this point black is keeping this pressure in the center, and he can either push the pawn forward or take on e4, and it is for black to decide. And therefore this pressure constantly keeps white in tension, because white always have to keep in mind these different options of black, and therefore releasing the tension and playing pawn to d4 makes white's life easier. Anyway, in the game d4 was played, and now Kasparov played knight to f2, because it also protects the d3 square, which was already under the potential threat of black's queen. And here black played the same mistake once again. They released the tension here on c3, which again makes it easier for white to control the situation. White recaptured by the pawn, and black played bishop to c5. Now we can see why black opted for this d4 advancement and exchange. He's trying to attack white directly, trying to put pressure onto the white's weak pawn d3, and so he wants to eliminate the defender, the knight, and after that to grab the pawn. And even though this straightforward attacking plan looks interesting, but the problem for black is that it's really hard for him to develop his attack somehow. Here Kasparov played knight to f1, slightly mysterious move. Well, the first intent is fairly obvious. He wants to protect the d3 weak pawn by the queen. But the question that I got here is, why not knight to b3? If I take a move back here, instead of going backwards, the knight could go forward while attacking the black's also bishop from here on c5, which would also pursue the same purpose. Well, I guess here that the idea of Kasparov was still to avoid encounter of the pieces so that computer does not have a chance to show his brilliant calculation abilities, and therefore Kasparov is trying to keep his pieces close, to his army, therefore to reduce the chance of blundering. By the way, it was also a blitz game, I gotta mention. Anyway, computer here played bishop takes f2. Well, another positional mistake. Bishop is stronger than a knight, and you should not trade it unless you can seize a certain specific benefit in the following move. So here Kasparov recapture, black played queen to d7, knight e3, white just develops his pieces, and black castles queenside, once again putting pressure on the weak pawn on d3. And it's a fairly interesting position, I gotta say, because right here Kasparov is forced to play the move bishop to f1 just to protect this weak pawn on d3. And at first it may seem like black is fully developed, while white was dancing back and forth with his few minor pieces and played a bit weird moves with his pawns. So it looks like black should be way superior in this position, while in fact the situation is right the opposite, because white has this strong pawn shield in the center, and it's really hard for black's pieces to somehow go forward. And because of that, the black's idea to somehow develop a quick attack kind of failed, while white has two bishops, strong pawn center, and positional advantage, and therefore white will finalize his development within the next few moves, but will save his positional advantage. And here we can see a quite funny thing, because computer played pawn to h6. It's kind of struggling to find the right plan, which happens to human beings as well, when you are hesitating which plan to choose or what even to do at all, and then you're playing some move just because it's time to make a move. It's a blitz game, right? And here it kind of happened to computer. It was confused, it was not sure which plan to choose, and it played some weird move which makes no sense. I also gotta say that even though this match was won by the Kasparov, but it was kind of beginning of the end for humanity, so to say, because computers definitely were not going to surrender.
I'll be back.
Okay, still Kasparov is in control. He's playing bishop to e2. He's still finalizing the development of his pieces. Black played king b8, queen a4. Already white shows his aggressive intentions on the queen side. Here white is ready to put the rook on the b file, and together with this queen looking towards the black's position, you can see that white has a clear plan of pressuring the black's king there. Black played pawn on g6. Computer is still struggling to pick the right plan, and it was actually not that easy for black to do it, really, because of its previous mistakes. Probably the correct plan for black would be here to just push the kingside pawns forward, trying to disturb the white's king there. Anyway, computer played pawn on g6, white played rook d1. He's bringing all of his pieces into play, and finally computer kind of started pushing pawns forward in a more meaningful way on the king side, but it's way too late, because now white plays rook b1, and as you can see, the white's army is now fully mobilized and he's ready for some aggressive ideas against the black's king. Computer played pawn h4, trying to open up the position, but of course Kasparov keeps it closed. He plays pawn g4 so that his king is not exposed and black can't really attack it. Black played knight e8, perhaps trying to play pawn f5 and to break through the white's defense and to start ultimately the attack against the white's king. But again, because of the black's previous inaccurate moves, now white's position is just so strong, and Kasparov plays the great move pawn to d4. We also got to give credit to Kasparov playing against a strong computer in a blitz game. He's playing a lot of great moves here. And the idea here is that now black has no time for some potential advancement on the king side, because white now has a lot of threats, either to take the pawn or to push the pawn forward and attack a whole lot of black's pieces there. And therefore, computer has to take there on d4. In this position, by the way, Kasparov just recaptured on d4, and definitely we cannot criticize him for that, but because it's just a very natural move to play. But in fact, there was a winning combination here. It's not that easy to find it, but I'd like to challenge you to try doing that. So please think about this and write it down in the comments below if you can find the winning move for white here. There was the way for white to actually win the game right here. Kasparov missed it. Let's see if you can find it, and I'll show you the solution later. Alright, so Kasparov just recaptured here on d4. And computer took the pawn on d4 as well, even though black won the pawn. But the problem for him is that now there is this pin, and so the knight is kind of hanging there on d4, and white wants to win it. But right now white played queen b4, threatening checkmate in 1, queen takes b7. Black played pawn on b6, And white played bishop b2, trying to win the knight on d4, which was actually slightly inaccurate, and it was better for white to play the move knight to c2, but of course it's not that easy to figure it out during a real practical game. The difference is that after knight to c2, because of this pin, the knight is just lost and white is gonna capture it. All right, and when white played bishop to b2, let's take a move back here, Kasparov played bishop b2, it looks similar, but it allows black to play pawn to c5. All right, and now this knight is protected and white can't take the pawn because there is no pin anymore. This bishop blocks the line for the rook, right? And because of this tactical little nuance, it helped black to save the position here. Oh, right, and in this position Kasparov played another brilliant move. He sacrificed a queen for a pawn. He played queen takes c5, which definitely adds fuel to the fire, and after that black still suffers being under strong pressure of white. There were also some comments that at this point computer actually frozen, and it's also interesting how the white psychological attack could confuse even a machine. Anyway, black recaptured, and now bishop takes d4. Discover check to the black's king, therefore the king has to go, and now bishop takes h8. At the end of this variation, we can see that white sacrificed a queen in exchange for a queen and a rook and a minor piece. But because now black's king is exposed and he's got weaknesses, white still has a good chances to develop his attack. And black played actually an incorrect move knight to d6. He actually, it actually made the same mistake twice of letting white taking advantage of the pin on the knight. By the way, if you don't want to make this mistake, I have another video, 2 important tactical motifs you should know, where I go in depth about these 2 most important tactical motifs, and one of them is a pin. So if you're interested, you can click the link below the video in the description and check this video after watching this one. And Kasparov played bishop e5, which was, the right idea, but not the right execution. The better idea was for white to firstly play bishop f6, this intermediate move, driving the rook away, and after that, white could still play the move bishop e5, but in this case, there is no escape for the knight, and it will be captured on the next move, and white just wins the game. In the real game, white played bishop e5 immediately, while the black's rook was still standing on d8. And there is a difference because now black could play queen to e7, and because the rook is protecting the knight, black is not losing it. Nevertheless, white still keeps the pressure, and he plays another great move, because right now black was going to play pawn to f6 and driving this bishop away. So white plays pawn to g5 to lock the black's position there on the king side. Notice that the queen cannot capture this pawn because the queen must protect the knight on d6 or else it will be captured. Therefore, black played rook d7, white continued bishop f6, attacking the queen, queen to e8. Here Kasparov played knight to d5, bringing the knight further, and computer played pawn to h3. Computer was not sure what to do. It's again funny how computer could not find the right plan and just play some random move. Kasparov plays pawn to a4, perhaps not the strongest move, but we also understand that it was a blitz game, so he's just trying to do some meaningful move, and the pawn is ready to go forward and potentially lock the black's king in the cage. Black played queen to c8, pawn to a5, and here Fritz found an interesting combination which actually helps black to save the game. He traded firstly the knight on d5, and after that sacrificed the knight on e4. The idea of black is that after a series of exchanges here, black has this nasty queen to f5 move with a double attack to the king and the rook. It's not winning actually for black here, because after bishop to f3, queen to c2, this intermediate check, and even though black managed to win some material here, but now the white's pawn is going forward. d6 with a check to the black's king, king b8, pawn to d7, and now the pawn is only 1 square away from the promotion. But it is black to play, so he goes king e1. Now the black's plan is to keep hunting for the white's king and trying to deliver the perpetual check. And at this point, Fritz made a deadly mistake. It played queen to e6. Now, there was actually, if I take a move back here, the choice between queen to f1 and queen to e6. And Fritz made the wrong choice. Once again, back in 1992, computers were not as strong as they are today, and therefore computer could not calculate the line until the end. The point is, why is queen e6 wrong? Queen e6 allows white to replace the bishop to g4, and from here protects the pawn. And so now white never has to worry about losing this pawn after black delivers check from some squares. And because white doesn't have to worry about this pawn, he can now relocate his king whenever he wants. You know, he can even bring it to h8, let's say. I'm just fantasizing, but I mean, the king can go anywhere, and white doesn't have to worry about the pawn. And that is the big problem for black, because he played queen e6, he allowed white to put the bishop on g4. And now black tried to deliver the same perpetual check, but here is the problem. The white's king can just gradually escape. Notice, by the way, another interesting motif. The king is not trying to run away from the queen, quite the contrary. It tries to keep itself closer to the queen. What's the point? The point is now the king itself is taking away some squares from the queen, and therefore it reduces the options for black. So there are fewer ways for black to deliver a check, and therefore white has greater chances to escape from checks, which Kasparov did brilliantly. The king ultimately went all the way forward to e8, and now the next move, the queen promotion is inevitable, so Fritz still played queen to c6, now king to f7, and after that even bishop a6. And here it's time to resign, which Fritz did on the next move, because the queen is going to be promoted on the next move, and black is helpless. And now let me reveal the solution to the puzzle. If you remember, in the middle of the game, there was a moment where Kasparov played the natural move pawn takes d4, while missing the brilliant combination he could have played rook takes b7. White could have actually went against the black's king directly, which leads to a checkmate, so bishop a6 and bishop to b5. White is ready to sacrifice even more material because black can now take the knight with a check, but the white's idea is pretty simple. He's going to take on c6 and with the help of the bishop and the queen to checkmate the black's king. So even if black takes now the knight on e3, bishop takes, queen takes d1, white sacrificed almost all of his material, but it doesn't help black because now white can easily checkmate the black's lonely king. That could have been a brilliant finish for this game, but of course we shouldn't criticize Kasparov too much because it was not that easy to find it. Finally, don't forget to watch another video, 2 most important chess tactical motifs you should know, so that you know how to find combinations like that yourself. Also, you may wish to check out my free masterclass, The Best Way to Improve at Chess Instantly, so that you know the most efficient ways to progress in chess. And I wish you best of luck in your chess battles.